and Mommy getting divorced?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "Adults sometimes have problems they need to work out," Eliot said carefully. "But no matter what happens, we both love you very much." "That's not an answer," Chloe said, and I was struck by how much she sounded like her father. Direct, logical, cutting through the nonsense. "We're just having a rough patch, sweetheart," I said. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" she pressed. I looked at Eliot, hoping he'd help me, but his expression was unreadable. "The kind that hurt people's feelings," I said finally. "Did you hurt Daddy's feelings?" The simple question from my 6-year-old daughter hit harder than all the judgment from friends and family combined. Because yes, I had hurt Daddy's feelings, and maybe that had been the point all along. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." Chloe nodded solemnly. "You should say sorry." "I'm trying to, baby, but sometimes sorry isn't enough." That night, after Chloe was in bed, I found Eliot in the living room, reading on his tablet. "She's right, you know," I said. "I should say sorry. I am sorry." He looked up at me with those calm, analytical eyes. "Are you? Or are you sorry you got caught?" "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I embarrassed our family. I'm sorry I made such a mess of everything. But are you sorry you did it? Or just sorry it didn't work out the way you planned?" The question stopped me cold, because if I was being honest, really, truly honest, I wasn't sure I could answer that. "I don't know," I admitted. "At least that's honest." He went back to his reading. "The attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow. You should probably get a lawyer." "Eliot, please don't do this. Think about Chloe." "I am thinking about Chloe. I'm thinking about what kind of example we're setting for her. I'm thinking about what kind of home environment she deserves." "And you think a broken home is better?" "I think an honest home is better than a dishonest one." The next morning, I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit, holding an official-looking envelope. "Process server." My hands shook as I signed for the papers, and my legs nearly gave out when I read the header: "Petition for dissolution of marriage and emergency motion for temporary custody." Eliot wasn't just divorcing me. He was trying to take Chloe away from me. I called in sick to work and spent the day on the phone with divorce attorneys, but every consultation felt like another confirmation of how badly I'd miscalculated. The evidence against me was overwhelming. The text messages, the social media posts, the public nature of my prank. "Mrs. Graves," one attorney said bluntly, "you need to understand that in custody cases, the court considers the moral character and judgment of both parents. Your recent actions don't paint you in a favorable light." But I never actually cheated. "The court will look at your behavior pattern, your decision-making process, and the impact on the child. The fact that you orchestrated this situation as what you call a prank may actually work against you. It suggests poor judgment and a willingness to manipulate situations for personal gain." By evening, I was desperate. I called my parents, begging them to come over and help me figure out what to do. They arrived within an hour, my mother armed with righteous indignation and my father looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week. "This is ridiculous," Janet declared, waving the divorce papers. "He's being vindictive and cruel. No judge will give him full custody over a harmless flirtation." But Tom was quieter, more thoughtful. "Lenore, honey, I need you to be completely honest with me. Was this really just innocent fun?" I wanted to lie, to maintain the fiction I'd been telling myself. But looking at my father's disappointed face, I couldn't. "I wanted him to notice me," I said. "I wanted him to fight for me." "So you decided to humiliate him publicly?" "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "But it did go that far. And now your daughter is asking me why Mommy and Daddy don't live together anymore." The weight of what I'd done finally began to settle over me. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about Chloe, about the family I'd torn apart in pursuit of attention and excitement, But even as the reality crashed down around me, part of me still felt like the victim, like everyone was overreacting to a simple mistake. I just wasn't ready to admit that the mistake wasn't the prank itself. It was thinking I could control the consequences. The law office smelled like leather and disappointment. I sat across from Eliot in the conference room, our respective attorneys flanking us like generals preparing for war. But while my hastily hired lawyer shuffled through papers with barely concealed panic, Eliot's attorney moved with the precision of someone who held all the winning cards. "Mrs. Graves," Attorney Morrison began, sliding a thick folder across the polished table, "we'd like to present the evidence we've compiled regarding your recent activities." My stomach lurched as I opened the folder. The first page was a timeline, meticulously organized and color-coded. Every text message, every phone call, every social media post I'd made over the past month was documented with timestamps and screenshots. "This is stalking," I said, my voice shaking. "This is invasion of privacy." "This is documentation," Morrison replied calmly. "Your husband had every right to investigate suspicious behavior in his own home using devices on his own phone plan." I flipped through the pages, seeing my own words thrown back at me, messages to Jasper that looked so much worse in black and white. "Eliot doesn't appreciate what he has. Maybe I need someone who does. You always knew how to make me feel special." "These are taken out of context," I protested. "Are they?" Morrison pulled out another document. "This is a statement from Mr. Jasper Vane, provided voluntarily after Mr. Graves contacted him." I read Jasper's statement with growing horror. He'd thrown me completely under the bus, painting himself as an innocent victim of my manipulation. Mrs. Graves contacted me claiming she was unhappy in her marriage. She suggested meeting for coffee, which I assumed was innocent. However, her messages became increasingly inappropriate and suggestive. When I realized she was trying to use me to make her fiancé jealous, I immediately cut off contact. I want no part in the dissolution of their relationship. "He's lying," I said desperately. "He was just as involved." "Do you have evidence of that?" Morrison asked. "Because Mr. Vane saved all your messages before blocking you, but apparently you deleted most of yours." My lawyer, a nervous man named Peterson, who I'd hired based on a Google search, finally spoke up. "My client was going through pre-wedding stress. Many people have doubts before marriage. Many people don't act on those doubts by pursuing extramarital relationships," Morrison interrupted. "And many people don't document their activities on social media for the world to see." He pulled out printed screenshots of my Facebook posts, Instagram stories, and even LinkedIn activity. Seeing it all laid out like that, I realized how calculated it must have looked to everyone else. "Mrs. Graves," Morrison continued, "your husband tried to address his concerns privately. He asked you directly about Mr. Vane. He expressed his discomfort with your behavior. How did you respond?" I remembered that conversation in the kitchen, when Eliot had asked me who Jasper was. I'd lied. I'd gaslighted him, made him think he was being paranoid. I told him it was nothing. You told him he was being paranoid. You accused him of not trusting you. You made him question his own judgment while continuing to meet with Mr. Vane behind his back. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Every word out of Morrison's mouth was true, but hearing it all laid out like this made me sound like a monster. "I never slept with him," I said weakly. "Physical adultery isn't the only form of betrayal, Mrs. Graves. Emotional adultery, deception, and public humiliation can be just as damaging to a marriage and to the children involved." At the mention of Chloe, I looked up sharply. "What does this have to do with custody? I'm a good mother." Morrison pulled out another folder. "Let's discuss that. This is a report from your daughter's school counselor documenting behavioral changes over the past month. Increased anxiety, difficulty concentrating, asking teachers if her parents are getting divorced." I felt sick. Kids pick up on tension. They do. which is why the court considers the stability of the home environment when making custody decisions. Mrs. Graves, you involved your daughter in your deception. You had her lie to her father about your whereabouts. You used her as a prop in your social media posts, designed to make your husband jealous. But even as I started to protest, I remembered. The day I met Jasper, I told Chloe we were going to see Mommy's friend and asked her not to mention it to Daddy because it was a surprise. I'd used my 6-year-old daughter as an accomplice in my lies. Peterson tried to mount a defense. Mrs. Graves made some poor choices, but she's learned from them. She's willing to attend counseling. Is she? Morrison looked directly at me. Mrs. Graves, do you take full responsibility for your actions? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room was looking at me, waiting for my answer. This was my chance to show remorse, to demonstrate that I understood the gravity of what I'd done. But looking at Eliot's calm, composed face, I felt a surge of anger. He was sitting there like a judge, like he was perfect, like he bore no responsibility for the state of our marriage. I take responsibility for my part, I said carefully. But Eliot shares some blame too. He was emotionally distant, he took me for granted, he made me feel invisible in my own marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison nodded slowly. So, even now, faced with the dissolution of your marriage and the potential loss of custody of your daughter, you're still blaming your husband for your choices. I'm not blaming him, I'm just saying, you're saying that his behavior justified yours, that his emotional distance gave you the right to pursue another man, that his focus on work and providing for his family somehow excused your deception and manipulation. When he put it like that, it sounded horrible. But wasn't there some truth to it? Wasn't Eliot partially responsible for the breakdown of our relationship? Mrs. Graves, Morrison said, pulling out one final document, this is a financial analysis of your recent spending. Restaurant bills, new clothes, salon appointments, all in preparation for your meetings with Mr. Vane. You used marital funds to finance your affair. I stared at the credit card statements, seeing my own signature on receipts I'd forgotten about, the dress I'd bought for the bistro meeting, the expensive highlights I'd gotten the week before, the dinner at that trendy restaurant where Jasper and I had met for our second coffee date. This wasn't an affair, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. What would you call it? I looked around the room, at Morrison's satisfied expression, at Peterson's defeated slump, at Eliot's unreadable face. How had I gotten here? How had a simple prank to get my husband's attention turned into this legal nightmare? I call it a mistake, I said finally. A mistake you're still not willing to fully own, Morrison replied. Mr. Graves, on the other hand, has conducted himself with dignity throughout this process. He attempted to address the issues privately. He's maintained his focus on his daughter's well-being. He's been transparent with his attorney and cooperative with all proceedings. I wanted to argue, to point out that Eliot's dignity felt more like coldness, that his transparency felt like betrayal. But looking at the mountain of evidence against me, I realized how weak my position really was. We'll see you in court, Mrs. Graves, Morrison said, closing his files. I suggest you use the time between now and then to consider whether you want to continue fighting this battle, or whether you want to focus on minimizing the damage to your daughter. As we left the law office, I tried one last time to reach Eliot. Please, I said, catching his arm in the parking lot. Don't do this. Think about Chloe. Think about our family. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back up at my face. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I'd married, the man who had once loved me enough to propose. I am thinking about Chloe, he said quietly. I'm thinking about what kind of mother she needs, what kind of example she deserves, what kind of home will help her grow into a woman of character and integrity. And you don't think I can provide that? Lenore, you orchestrated an elaborate deception to manipulate my emotions, involved our daughter in your lies, humiliated our family publicly, and even now, you can't take full responsibility for your choices. What do you think? He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with the ruins of my marriage scattered around my feet. For the first time since this whole mess started, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I really was the villain in this story. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, all marble columns and echoing footsteps that seemed to announce my shame to everyone within earshot. I sat at the defendant's table, and wasn't that a bitter irony, watching Eliot across the aisle with his mother and sister, flanking him like a wall of quiet dignity. My parents had come too, my mother clutching her purse like armor, and my father looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The contrast between our two families was stark. Theirs composed and united, mine fractured and defensive. Judge Patricia Henley entered the courtroom with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of human failure imaginable. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with steel-grey hair and eyes that seemed to cut straight through pretense. This is a hearing for dissolution of marriage and determination of child custody in the matter of Graves versus Graves, she announced. I've reviewed the preliminary filings and evidence. Mr. Morrison, you may proceed. Eliot's attorney stood with the confidence of a man holding a royal flush. Your Honor, this case represents a clear pattern of deception, manipulation, and poor judgment that has created an unstable environment for the minor child involved. He laid out the evidence methodically, the timeline of my relationship with Jasper, the financial records showing how I'd used marital funds to finance my prank, the social media posts that had humiliated our family publicly. With each piece of evidence, I felt myself shrinking smaller in my chair. Mrs. Graves engaged in what she terms a prank, Morrison continued, but which was actually a calculated campaign of emotional manipulation designed to provoke jealousy in her husband. She involved the minor child as an accomplice in her deception and has consistently refused to take full responsibility for her actions. When it was Peterson's turn to defend me, I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. He'd warned me that morning that our case was weak, but I'd insisted on fighting. Your Honor, Mrs. Graves admits she made poor choices during a stressful time. Pre-wedding anxiety is common, and while her actions were misguided, they stemmed from feeling neglected in her relationship. She never engaged in physical adultery and is committed to rebuilding her family through counseling. Judge Henley looked up from her notes. Mr. Peterson, you say your client is committed to rebuilding her family. Has she expressed remorse for her specific actions? Peterson glanced at me nervously. We'd rehearsed this, but standing in that courtroom under the judge's piercing gaze, the words I'd practiced seemed hollow and insufficient. Mrs. Graves, the judge addressed me directly, please stand and tell me in your own words what you did wrong and why. I stood on shaking legs, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. This was my chance to show genuine remorse, to demonstrate that I understood the gravity of my actions. Your Honor, I made some bad decisions when I was feeling unappreciated in my marriage. I reached out to an old friend for attention, and things got out of hand. I never meant for it to go as far as it did, and I never meant to hurt anyone. The judge's expression didn't change. What specifically did you do wrong, Mrs. Graves? I texted with another man and met him for coffee. Is that all? I felt trapped. Every word I said seemed to make things worse, but the silence was even more damaging. I lied to my husband about where I was going. I posted about it on social media. I used our daughter as an excuse. You used your daughter as an accomplice in deception, Judge Henley corrected. What else? I spent money on clothes and things for the meetings. You used marital funds to finance an emotional affair while planning your wedding to your husband. What else? Each question was like a scalpel, cutting away my justifications and excuses until only the ugly truth remained. I made my husband feel like he was paranoid when he questioned me. I made him doubt his own judgment, You gaslit him, the judge said bluntly. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I looked around the courtroom, at Eliot's calm, sad face, at my parents' horrified expressions, at little Chloe sitting with Marion in the gallery, looking confused and scared. I'm sorry, I whispered. Are you sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the same thing Eliot had asked me, and I still didn't have a good answer. I'm sorry I hurt people, I said finally. Judge Henley made a note, then looked up at me again. Mrs. Graves, do you believe your husband bears any responsibility for your actions? This was the moment. This was where I could either take full ownership of my choices or continue down the path that had brought me here. I thought about Eliot, really thought about him. Yes, he worked long hours. Yes, he could be emotionally reserved. Yes, he sometimes made me feel taken for granted, but he'd never cheated on me. He'd never lied to me. He'd never used our daughter as a pawn in some twisted game. He'd been a faithful husband and a devoted father, and I'd repaid that with betrayal and humiliation. No, Your Honor, I said, my voice barely audible. This was all my fault. For the first time since I'd started speaking, Judge Henley's expression softened slightly. Thank you for that honesty, Mrs. Graves. Please be seated. She called Chloe's school counselor to testify about the changes in my daughter's behavior, and each word was like a knife to my heart. My little girl had been asking if Mommy and Daddy were getting divorced. She'd been having nightmares. She'd started acting out in class. In my professional opinion, the counselor concluded, Chloe would benefit from a stable, consistent home environment while her parents worked through their issues. When Marion took the stand as a character witness for Eliot, I wanted to object to everything she said, but I couldn't because it was all true. Eliot was a devoted father. He was reliable, honest, and put Chloe's needs first. He'd never missed a school event or bedtime story, even when work was demanding. Has your son ever spoken to you about his marriage? Morrison asked, only to say that he was concerned about Lenore's behavior and wanted to protect Chloe from any instability. Did he ever express anger or desire for revenge? No. He was hurt, but his focus was always on what was best for his daughter. Finally, it was time for closing arguments. Morrison painted a picture of a stable, responsible father seeking to protect his child from an unstable situation created by his wife's poor judgment and manipulation. Peterson tried his best to portray me as a woman who'd made mistakes but deserved a chance to make amends. But his arguments felt weak even to me. Judge Henley retired to consider her decision, and the waiting was agony. I sat in the hallway with my parents, watching Eliot and his family maintain their quiet dignity while I felt like I was falling apart. This is all going to work out, my mother kept saying. No judge would take a child away from her mother over a misunderstanding. But my father was quiet, and when I looked at him, I saw disappointment and shame in his eyes. Dad? I just keep thinking about what Mrs. Patterson is going to say when she hears about this, he said quietly, about what everyone in the neighborhood is going to think. Is that all you care about? What the neighbors think? I care about my granddaughter, he said firmly, and I care about the fact that you've put all of us in this position. When we were called back into the courtroom, Judge Henley's expression was grave. This case represents a failure of judgment and character that has had serious consequences for all parties involved, but most importantly, for the minor child at the center of this dispute. She looked directly at me. Mrs. Graves, your actions demonstrated a pattern of deception, manipulation, and poor decision-making that raises serious questions about your fitness as a primary custodial parent. You involved your daughter in your deceptions, used marital resources to finance an emotional affair, and publicly humiliated your family through social media. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her words. However, I also recognize that you have finally acknowledged full responsibility for your actions, which suggests some capacity for growth and change. a flicker of hope. Therefore, the court grants the dissolution of marriage as requested. Custody of the minor child Chloe Graves is awarded to the father, Eliot Graves, with supervised visitation rights for the mother every other weekend, pending successful completion of family counseling and anger management courses. The gavel came down like a death sentence. I sat in stunned silence as the courtroom emptied around me. Supervised visitation. I could only see my own daughter under supervision, like I was a danger to her. Eliot approached my table as I sat there in shock. "Lenore," he said quietly, "this doesn't have to be permanent. If you do the work, real work on yourself, we can revisit the custody arrangement in a year." I looked up at him through my tears. "Do you hate me?" "No," he said, and I could hear the sadness in his voice. "I'm disappointed, I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. I just can't trust you with our daughter's well-being right now." He walked away, taking Chloe's hand as they left the courtroom. My little girl looked back at me once, confused and scared, before disappearing through the doors. I sat alone at the defendant's table, holding the custody papers in my shaking hands, finally understanding the true cost of my harmless prank. I had wanted excitement, attention, and passion. Instead, I got divorce papers, supervised visitation, and the knowledge that I had destroyed my family for the sake of a game that was never worth playing. The joke, it turned out, was on me. It presents a failure of judgment and character that has had serious consequences for all parties involved, but most importantly, for the minor child at the center of this dispute. She looked directly at me. "Mrs. Graves, your actions demonstrated a pattern of deception, manipulation, and poor decision-making that raises serious questions about your fitness as a primary custodial parent. You involved your daughter in your deceptions, used marital resources to finance an emotional affair, and publicly humiliated your family through social media." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her words. "However, I also recognize that you have finally acknowledged full responsibility for your actions, which suggests some capacity for growth and change." A flicker of hope. Therefore, the court grants the dissolution of marriage as requested. Custody of the minor child Chloe Graves is awarded to the father, Eliot Graves, with supervised visitation rights for the mother every other weekend, pending successful completion of family counseling and anger management courses. The gavel came down like a death sentence. I sat in stunned silence as the courtroom emptied around me. Supervised visitation. I could only see my own daughter under supervision, like I was a danger to her. Eliot approached my table as I sat there in shock. "Lenore," he said quietly, "this doesn't have to be permanent. If you do the work, real work on yourself, we can revisit the custody arrangement in a year." I looked up at him through my tears. "Do you hate me?" "No," he said, and I could hear the sadness in his voice. "I'm disappointed, I'm hurt, but I don't hate you. I just can't trust you with our daughter's well-being right now." He walked away, taking Chloe's hand as they left the courtroom. My little girl looked back at me once, confused and scared, before disappearing through the doors. I sat alone at the defendant's table, holding the custody papers in my shaking hands, finally understanding the true cost of my harmless prank. I had wanted excitement, attention, and passion. Instead, I got divorce papers, supervised visitation, and the knowledge that I had destroyed my family for the sake of a game that was never worth playing. The joke, it turned out, was on me.